I'm going to do my best to tell a good yarn this afternoon as we're coming to the close of what's been an incredible 2 days. Prior to being a civic innovator and community organizer, I was a storyteller. And so what I would like to do today is to tell a story of the third horizon, of a post-scarcity, post-collapse, post-nation state world. And this presentation is intended to weave together many bodies of work that are being done by many of the people who are here in this room. And it's such an honor to be able to tell a story that weaves together things that are already happening, that are already underway. And to me, what that speaks to is that there is actually an emerging pattern of returning back to life that is moving through many of us, any of us who have taken the time to slow down enough to listen to the call of life. And so I want to honor the people who came before me, who helped me awaken to hear that call. People like Vandana Shiva, people like Nora Bateson, people like Joanna Macy. And in Joanna Macy's model of the Great Turning, moving from an industrial growth-based society into a life-affirming society, she invokes these three core components of this transition process that we're engaged in now. Holding actions, which are traditional activism, shifts in consciousness, changing our worldviews and our ontologies to shift our intrinsic motivation and behaviors, and structural change. And this idea, a planetary federation of bioregions, is a structural change. It's a fundamental reimagining of how our society and our economies might be organized that moves us out of an extractive, growth-based society that is driven by corporate capture and the corruption that now plagues all of these institutions. I love that Lynne Twist earlier today quoted Bucky, who's also a part of this lineage, saying that, in fact, this 50-year period, we're just seeing the disintegration of these legacy institutions. And that instead of trying to remediate them, it's actually our responsibility to create the new institutions that are based in this embodiment of the philosophy of interbeing and of stewardship of our cones. And another person I'd be remiss to not mention is Daniel Schmachtenberger, who's been a really great influence in my life. And he calls this moment that we're currently in the meta-crisis, which I sometimes feel like, do I have to explain what the meta-crisis is in every presentation I give? And I'm hoping eventually I don't. But just for the sake of clarity and being in shared reality, I'm going to provide a very brief definition of what the meta-crisis is. It's generally characterized by self-reinforcing feedback loops. And this we see in our democracy, where we elect someone to go to office. And in order for them to get into that position of power, they have to accept donations from large multinational corporations and participate in a corrupted two-party system. And by the time they're there, they actually don't have the agency to make the change that we elected them to make. And so these patterns reinforce themselves, and the means of address that we would normally use to make different choices together as a species are not possible. And the same is true with capital accumulation. The more capital that accrues to these large multinationals, the more capital that they're able to accrue. And so these are self-reinforcing feedback loops. Second, I would say the meta-crisis could be defined by misaligned incentives. These are drivers of behavior that are misaligned with the qualities of life. And third, I would say the meta-crisis is defined by cultures of separation, atomization and fragmentation that reproduce themselves in the very way that we see ourselves as being separate from each other and not belonging to the commons of our earth as a home. And so the reason I start all of these presentations with this definition is because these are the qualities and characteristics that we must understand in order to design alternative systems that are the basis of a civilization rooted in a different value system. We need to design systems that are self-correcting. So we need actually participatory democracy. And we need a participatory democracy that is informed by Earth systems data that enables us as a public to sense into the holistic ramifications of the collective choices that we make in these new emerging democratic institutions. We also need aligned incentives. And this can be accomplished through the production of new types of currencies that are not based in extraction and debt. And this can also be achieved through worker-owned cooperatives, where the people who are making choices about how our economy operates are directly accountable to their communities, and they're not able to abstract away the extractive tendencies that these giant corporations currently can. And third, we would need a revitalization of civic culture. This is a way of being in relationship with each other that understands that we belong to each other, that understands that we need to seek mutual benefit, and that we have a mutual responsibility to care for our communities and our commons. And I believe that bioregionalism is a design pathway that reflects what Daniel Schmachtenberger calls the third attractor. This is a system equilibrium that is made up of these characteristics. And bioregionalism, which many of the presentations the last few days have already explained, is a fundamental reimagining of our socioeconomic systems through the lens of holopticism, of understanding that we are wholes within wholes, and that our socioeconomic systems should reflect that we are wholes nested within other wholes. And if we take these principles and we begin to create new systems based on these ideas, we begin to discover our cosmolocality through creating architectures that reflect this nested holonic way of seeing the world. Cosmolocalism is this idea that we have a kind of universal belonging that we experience through the most local scale that we belong to. And in this way, if we design infrastructures and architectures that reflect this way of seeing the world, we begin to uncover that universal solidarity through the relationships that we have with the people and the ecologies that we call home. And this is what I refer to as planetary commons architectures. And Buckminster Fuller has this quote, one of his lesser known quotes: "If you want to teach people a new way of thinking, don't bother trying to teach them. Instead, give them a tool, the use of which will lead to new ways of thinking." This is a strategy for creating systemic adaptation and cultural change at a large scale. By creating tools that have alternative value systems embedded into their design, we are empowering the public to have a different relationship with the commons. And when we create tools that are interoperable through this bioregional cosmolocal lens, we start to create this basin of attraction of actually these small pockets of coherence that gradually form a new planetary civilization. And so this is a brief outline of a set of interconnected architectures. These are public goods, these are civic utilities that are informed by this cosmolocal and bioregional way of seeing the world. And I thought Stuart Cowan did an amazing job yesterday of outlining the thinking of the Planetary Regeneration Alliance and the kind of interconnected infrastructures that together form this kind of structural functional basis of a new kind of society. And the reason I'm telling this story is that it's important for us who are thinking in these ways to look for how our projects can interoperate with each other, for identifying how the work that Samantha Power is doing around financial mechanisms connects to bioregional hubs. How can we have alternative methods of currency, different methods of funding that are connected to templates that empower people to start cooperative businesses? How can self-sovereign ecologies, the work of Austin Wade Smith, connect to bioregional governance institutions that are grassroots, place-based, and holonically nested councils that move from the smallest neighborhood level through the bioregion to the watershed into a planetary federation? These are all interconnected utilities that, as we wire them together, begin to create the basis of a different kind of civilization. And so the three main considerations that I'm personally interested in are bioregional governance. And I see this being a process that really engages with traditional ecological knowledge, First Nations and Indigenous wisdom. I've been very inspired by the Great Law of Peace and the way in which Indigenous forms of governance are actually predate the US democracy and were actually informed the creation of our current democracy. And so I feel like we need to look back in order to look forward and to be in solidarity and right relationship to heal the wounds of colonization through the creation of new forms of governance in which all of these representatives of our places are held in a collective governance process. So these all need to be designed. I don't have any finished answers regarding any of these processes, but this is more of a design philosophy and approach, and a process that we're currently engaged in. And then we would also need circular economies. We would need to circulate resources and healthy regenerative feedback loops within localized communities and identify ways of trading across bioregions. And then third and most importantly, we need to create infrastructure for bioregional hubs. These are the physicalized, place-based instances of these patterns in which this cultural and social and economic repatterning can take place. This is not just a systemic process, this is a healing process, this is a spiritual process to come back into reciprocity and right relationship with our local communities. And this is an intentionally audacious vision. I want to acknowledge that where we are now, this future that I'm describing may seem nearly impossible. There are so many collapse scenarios on the horizon, and we're entering into a time where things are only going to get weirder and weirder. And yet, the reason I call it a post-tragic protopian audacity is that post-tragic is this sense that despite and acknowledging the many tragedies that are currently underway, we have a responsibility to dream. We have a responsibility to see beyond the capitalist realism that tells us that the world as it is the only way that the world could be. And this is where the punk part of solar, lunar, and myco-punk comes from. It's this rebellious spirit that says, even though it seems hopeless, I'm going to hope anyway. And also, as Lynne Twist said this morning, we are the hospice workers and the doulas. We are helping this old world come to a close and acknowledge all of the gifts that it gave us. We have this vast telecommunications network that capitalism helped produce. Thank you, capitalism. We'll see ya. And there's a tenderness, there's a softness, there's a tenuousness that is similar to birth. We don't know if the mother is going to die in this childbirth process. We don't know if the child is going to survive. There's a soberingness to that reality that is part of embracing this post-tragic moment. And protopian is the sense that we're actually not trying to create utopia. And I would actually discourage you from listening to people who tell you an idealized vision. If you just do it my way, we're going to get to utopia. Protopia is actually about a process, and it's about a collective imaginary. It's about aligning our individual and community agency with a process of development and growth and refinement over time, acknowledging that it's not going to be one solution. It's going to be a distributed collective process that moves us into a life-affirming world. And so this is why I helped to create this organization called OpenCivics. It's what we're intending to serve as a member of this Planetary Regeneration Alliance that so many of whom are in this room. This idea that if we can actually align around underlying frameworks, not to say that we need single solutions for each of these areas, but to understand that there are actually categories of different types of utilities that are necessary in order to create this parallel society or regenerative civilization. If we can align at least around what those different components are, and we can commit to working together beyond difference and to enter into a kind of radical solidarity that this moment calls for, that in this time of collapse and crisis, we don't have the time to see each other as rivalrous and, well, which regenerative token is going to be the one planetary token to rule them all? That kind of thinking is actually very detrimental to the kind of process that the Earth itself, I believe, is calling for us to engage in right now. And so the ethos of OpenCivics is looking at the underlying systemic drivers that are causing these crises, aligning around open standards and frameworks and schemas that empower us to work together on the system level of these solutions so that we can federate and interoperate and move towards this longer arc of human history that I believe will bring us towards a planetary federation of bioregions. Thank you.